What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss a little bit of Playtest 6 and follow up on a lot of the stuff I talked about in my last video with regards to some of the things that Offworld had added to the playtest. So hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below. What were your thoughts on the playtest? Did you get a chance to play it, and how'd it go? So first, let's talk about Playtest 6 a little bit more generally. Not really factoring in as much of the new things added to Squatter, the 9.0 update, but just more about the Unreal 5 engine and the progression. And frankly, I only played the playtest for a few hours because I just ran into kind of the same issue I had with Playtest 5. Just a significant amount of bugs that really deterred me from wanting to continue to do the playtest. It was tough to get into, it was tough to play, because to some extent I'm running into performance issues, or then I'm running into some bug, and it just seemed like every time we were trying to get situated or do anything in a small group that we had on, it just wasn't really progressing super well. So for example, we were playing as the CRF, the Canadian Resistance Force, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And we roll out, we get to our spot. We had a vehicle pushing us. We couldn't hit it with AT because we can't see through the AT scopes because of a bug. I see infantry, I try to engage with infantry, and I'm hitting shift on the new SKS with the ACOG, and it's zooming into my scope instead of steadying the rifle. Meanwhile, one of my squad mates had a game crash. You have someone else dealing with their own PC's performance issues. It's kind of chaotic. You know, I loaded up into Al-Bazr for one round, and I came around a corner, and I was dipping down below 40 FPS for a stent. I'm not really sure why. I don't know if it was server-related client side. It cleared up, but it was still a moment of like, I can't really function. And this is sort of the same stuff that I dealt with after Playtest 5. And it's kind of the thing I commented on, that it was just difficult to play. Just the sheer volume of bugs or just issues generally kind of make it difficult to even test some of the new stuff that's been added, which also feels like it's now layers of things that we have to work through and to get on the right track before 9.0 eventually releases. Now, I realize this is not the live version of Squad. There should be issues because it is a playtest. We need to encounter that, report it, and so on. But it just makes it difficult to even test or sort of dive into Squad in the way that you want, because ultimately the game is at its best when it's that immersive experience. I guess generally there were just a lot of things taking away from the gameplay or just served as distractions from the gameplay that made it difficult to be immersed and to be in the moment. I guess the good news is that I didn't have any personal crashes on my PC, and I didn't notice any server crashes, but I have heard from a couple server-related folks or server owners that they are still having some struggles with performance on their end, where it is eating up a lot of their CPUs for their servers and still causing some issues. It's like there are small moments in the playtest where you see the beauty of Unreal 5 and you see the potential, or maybe you have some good gunfights or some good things happen, but it's still a difficult experience to have to play through some of the bugs and issues. But I guess that is obviously, again, the point of the playtest. I think the concern that I have between now and whenever 9.0 releases is trying to get through as many of the bugs and stuff like that. Because like I told you guys, there's going to be an influx of new players when they see 9.0 released. And they see some of the visuals being posted by myself or other creators and anything that comes out from Offworld themselves. Like, how much patience does a new player have when they experience Squad for the first time after 9.0 releases and they hit shift and it zooms into the scope? Granted, that could be completely fixed by then, but I'm just looking at it from the perspective of like, this is a really great opportunity to see the game sort of evolve and get to a point where these visuals and all these things that we've been talking about are in place, and I'm just worried. Because mostly my last few playtest experiences have been bogged down by bugs and issues. I think generally from the just playtest standpoint, we ran into disconnects, we ran into performance issues, we had some scope issues still having to do with picture-in-picture scopes. I saw folks sliding around in the vehicle seats as they were driving, and you still can't seem to really brake a vehicle, or at least it just feels like forever before you can come to a complete stop. And there's still some audio bug issues where it's shifting channels or things are just incredibly loud, which is obviously distracting. Those are just a few things that I witnessed, and of course I've heard of more things that weren't necessarily in my gameplay. Now we've layered some new things in that of course are going to need their time to get polished up and fixed, like the Canadian Resistance Force. So something I left in my comments of my last video was that I feel like the WPMCs can be played very, very well and effectively, especially by experienced players. Folks that know a little bit about map control or understand how to utilize the faction to its best capability. And then you have the Canadian Resistance Force, which seems like this is for the upper echelon of players to try to figure out, because you're just missing a lot of the tools that typically are there to offset certain things. It's like if you pick a battle group that doesn't have a lot of armor, but they have an extra ATGM and you're fighting an armored group. It's like, okay, you have something to try and offset it, even if it's not your preference. But then you have the CRF, which is primarily semi-automatic weapons. So we're getting into a whole new level of challenges, especially for pub players to have to deal with and figure out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the round that I played in as the CRF just didn't go that well between the bugs and some other issues happening. And frankly, it didn't really matter how much we were able to contribute because the round only lasted about 30 minutes. It just did not go very well. Part of me does agree with a couple comments left on my last video that maybe the CRF just needs some old tank. Something to give them a little bit more of a backbone or a fallback if things are just not going well. That could come in and, maybe kill an IFV or two and change the battlefield picture a little bit when things are, maybe on the ropes. And part of that is just due to the maps you're playing on. Like, Manikugan's one thing, but when you also have Goose Bay, which has these wide open spaces where tank fights are just a part of it, doesn't really make sense not to have a tank. The way I'd put it is, if the Canadian Resistance Force is going to be on the battlefield, they need to send everything that they can get their hands on. Like, I can understand if they don't have a ton of fancy gear or the most up-to-date gear, but they need to play like this is their last stand every time they're on the battlefield. And I don't mean in their strategy. I mean in terms of their equipment. Give them extra IFVs. Give them something that it's like, man, we had these sitting in a barn, we pulled them out, and we're going for it. Can they have some old tank that lacks some of the new modern equipment, but it's beefy and it's just coming out of somebody's backyard in a barn? And they're like, here we go, we're going to use it today because we have to. Because this faction feels like it's up against the odds. And if it's primarily captured military equipment in this situation, I would think that these guys are going to full send whatever they have available on the battlefield to try to offset whatever's coming at them, even if it's a losing situation. Especially in the context of the game where it's just this one fight, it's not a campaign. Now, I don't have a lot to say about the new MEA, or the Ground Forces of Iran. It really is just a conversion of the name and some slight tweaks, role adjustments, and so on. Frankly, I think the one thing that I did notice was just better handling of the G3 with a magnified optic due to the gunplay changes also attached to this playtest. But before we go to the gunplay changes, I will say I just love the MP5 in that urban environment. It's just fun to use. Now, from what I can tell, the gunplay changes generally feel just like a slight refinement. It seems like a small upgrade or improvement to what we already had. In the comparisons I did in the last video, it wasn't like night and day difference, but there was, again, a little bit of help on that second shot or after recoil getting back to your target. I'm wondering if you guys notice this across the board, because obviously I haven't used every weapon, and I did feel a difference on, again, the G3 and a couple of the other guns. They just seemed a little bit improved. I need to use the AK a little bit more and see how that feels. But I just disagree with this being some significant change from the infantry combat overhaul or some reversal. It just is continued tweaks and polish to something that is already in place. So my hope is if this continues to get some tweaks or continues to get polished up for 9.0, we continue to see a little bit better performance of the gunfights within that 150 meter range, which is where you're going to notice these tweaks more than anywhere else. But I'd be curious if you guys had positive experiences or negative experiences with some of the gunplay changes. It is nice to see some updates for AT as well in terms of acquiring their target, which seems nice. That's an added bonus because that is something that I've heard plenty of concerns over in the last several months to years. We also got our first look at the Commendation System, sort of a work in progress to some degree, I think, because there's a couple things that I think need to be adjusted. First, and maybe the most noticeable thing and somewhat frustrating thing, is having the commendation tokens pop up on your screen while you're playing, which just is sort of disruptive, and I hope that that can be just removed flat out. And maybe something on the scoreboard can illustrate that you're gaining your tokens. Now, at the end of a match, it's going to be a really fast-paced experience to get your map voting in and get your tokens in. So at the end of a pub round, you're probably looking to mute the lobby, mute everybody on your team so that you can focus a little bit with at least your squad. You got to find your squad on the scoreboard, maybe expand it so you can actually see the list and not just the squad name, and then start rewarding players within your squad or on the team for that matter with commendations by right-clicking on their name and adding those commendations themselves. Meanwhile, map voting has already started. It's just a lot going on and you don't necessarily see it or quite feel the need to do it, or just maybe the intuitive connection isn't there yet. And I think that's where I'm sitting with the playtest generally, is that it's just not there yet. So I'm pleased that the playtest 5 wasn't the last playtest and Offworld decided to delay 9.0 and the Unreal 5 engine release. But I'm concerned that playtest 6 has happened and we still haven't seen a significant improvement to what we witnessed in playtest 5. And now we've added new variables to a degree on top of the Unreal 5 playtesting with the CRF, some changes to factions, gunplay, and more. And it is difficult to judge those things on top of a system that is still facing its own issues. It just feels like the playtest got significantly more crucial, but also the update is now so heavily weighted with the condensing of updates into 9.0 that, man, it just feels like a big mountain to climb, even more so than it was just a few weeks ago. So I do think it's critical that we are able to give more feedback and have more playtests to continue to get closer to what 9.0 needs to be, because I do think that needs to be a pretty positive experience at this point, given the time that it's taken for an update and the influx of players that will come check it out. But man, there is a lot that needs to be done to get this to that state. So with that, let me know your comments down below on the playtest, your experience, and of course, anything having to do with some of the new content that is in the playtest. Subscribe and leave a like on the video. I'd appreciate it, and I'll catch you next time.